Hi, it's Helen, and I am back with 2 more pattern drafting reviews. After last video, and I'll link it right up there, I got a couple messages and comments about 2 pattern drafting methods popularized by fashion design schools. The first one is Helen Joseph-Armstrong's method, which you can find in the Pattern Making for Fashion Design book. And then the second one is the Bunka method, popularized by the Bunka fashion school in Japan. So, I did a little bit more drafting. To recap, my goal was to find a pattern drafting method that works for my slightly plus size, definitely busty body. So before we begin, I want to go over the rating system that I made up for last video, and we're going to use that again in this video. For the first one, we're going over drafting difficulty, 1 being advanced and 5 being for beginners. Then time, 1 being it takes a really long time, set aside half or more of your day. And then 5 being it's about an hour. And then of course the most important that I think, which is it busty friendly? Is it plus size friendly? And how does it fit on me? Because I am the one that's reviewing it, so of course I'm going to make my input. So without further ado, let's go on to the methods. So the first one, the Helen Joseph-Armstrong method, requires 24 measurements, 12 for the front bodice and 12 for the back bodice. The directions are on a point-to-point system, which again means that you are marking a point A to another measurement. Like the vintage roar method in the last video, this only drafts down to the waist. So to save time, I decided not to continue on and adding the waist to hip measurement. I just decided to leave it at the waistline. So for the Helen Joseph-Armstrong method, I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. And that's because the drafting system is really simple to follow. Mark point A to B, B to C, so on and so forth. There were a lot of pictures in the book, so I didn't really feel like I was lost throughout the process of drafting. Now for the Bunka method, it uses only 3 measurements. But don't let that fool you. This method is very mathematical, which means you have to take all of those measurements and then do additional calculations for them. So you end up making calculations that you will use throughout the drafting process. There's only 2 pictures to follow and no real written instructions, so it was really difficult to follow, but I forged on. Having said all of that, I give the Bunka method a 2 out of 5 stars. It was really difficult to follow the instructions because there really weren't any. It was just 2 pictures that kind of showed you which measurements to use where. So that was a little bit weird to follow, considering all of the other methods had either written instructions or step-by-step instructions with pictures involved. And this one didn't have step-by-step instructions. It just kind of numerically on the picture showed you which lines to draw first, and then, so on and so forth. Now a tip for you all who are doing the Bunka method: if you take all of the calculations and you do that ahead of time, write it all down and it'll make your drafting a little bit easier. That way you're not calculating on the go. Now the next rating we're doing is time. So for the Helen Joseph-Armstrong method, I give it a 4 out of 5 stars because it was so easy to follow the instructions and there were so many pictures to follow that you really couldn't get lost while doing it. So for the Bunka method, I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars because while it felt like it took a lot of time when I had to do all the calculations, it really doesn't take that long when you have a calculator. While it felt weird having to follow only 2 pictures, it didn't have instructions that could confuse you, like, for example, the Natalie Bray method. So, like in the last video, I'm going to go over some things that I noticed during the drafting method before I continue rating it. So, for the Helen Joseph-Armstrong draft, I used all of my measurements and no standard measurements. Now I thought that because I had to take 24 measurements, this would be the best for me, but because certain assumptions were made for the method, it skews a lot of things. Particularly the arm's eye right here. I mean, it was an issue that I had with the last drafts in the last video, but this arm's eye was teeny tiny at 13 inches. And if we want to go for standards, that's like probably a little kid's armhole size. I don't really know. So I changed what I thought was the culprit, which is the new strap measurement, or the shoulder neck to side waist measurement, which is, by the way, not a standard measurement that you would be taking for any other pattern drafting methods that I've found so far. So this is a little weird to begin with, but I took that measurement from my personal measurement and I used the standard measurement. This standard measurement changed it a little bit, so the arm's eye was a little bit bigger, but it was still small, coming in at 16 inches. Now there are restrictions to this draft. The biggest ones being that we cannot go past this line, the bust line, or this line, which is the side seam line. Because if you were to draw that arm's eye and draw it past those lines, you would end up going in towards your bust, which you don't want to do, or towards the side seam, which would open that up as well. So basically you're going to get a big gap there just by trying to do that, and it's not going to fit properly in the arm's eye to begin with. With all of those issues, I decided that I wasn't even going to continue making this and trying to do a test fit, because my arm wouldn't even fit and I knew I would have a plethora of issues. On top of that, the drafting method also continues on to say that it is drafted for a size B cup, which means there is a 2-inch difference between your overbust and your bust, and you would have to do a full bust adjustment after you finish the draft. The purpose of this video is to try to find a busty friendly pattern drafting method, and I don't believe that to be busty friendly. Fortunately, the Bunka method didn't have the same issues with the arm's eye. The curious thing that I had was the amount of darts we had to make. We get a total of 4 waist darts, 1 bust dart, and a shoulder dart, for a total of 6 darts in this draft. I'm particularly worried about the reduction of the darts that extend past the bust line, here and here, taking in just a little too much at the bust. Now, since most of everything is based off of your bust measurement, I do worry that my shoulder seam will be a little bit too large because I have narrower shoulders, and if it's based off of my bust, it might skew a little bit too large. But that is something that I am used to doing for most pattern drafting methods, as seen in the last video, and for most patterns that I would have to buy. I would have to just take it in a little bit at the shoulder. So that's something I do expect to do. Smudge is back for this video, and he only has one thing to ask you. Have you subscribed to my channel yet? And if not, is his fluff not good enough for you? I mean, if that's not good enough, I don't know what is. Isn't that right, Mo? Anyway, continuing on to the rest of the rating. Obviously, I have no fit video for the Helen Joseph-Armstrong method. Like I said, I felt that it was just too much work and effort for me to try to redraft it to even feel comfortable making a bodice sloper to try on. But I will still rate this. So is it busty friendly? I give it a 1 out of 5 stars. Obviously the instructions even say that it's drafted for a B cup and you have to do a full bust adjustment. And even then it only tells you how much of an adjustment you need to do up to a double D cup, which is only a 4-inch difference between your overbust and your full bust measurement. So if you have a larger difference between your overbust and your full bust measurement, like me, then you might be SOL, you might be playing the guessing game on how much you need to expand your pattern to fit your larger bust. Is it plus size friendly? I give this a 1 out of 5 stars. Since a lot of the drafting is based off of a standard figure like this mannequin, well, not that mannequin, like this mannequin here, then it seems to get skewed really easily if you're an outlier from those standard measurements. For example, I'm bustier, so I'm an outlier, and thus why I had so many problems with that arm size section. It probably also had problems because I have a plus size body, I have a shorter torso than a standard model, so on and so forth. And for personal fit, I give it a 0 out of 5. Obviously, I couldn't even try to make it because I didn't feel comfortable trying to do extra changes to the draft just to try to make something sort of fit. So for the Bunka method, I am really surprised about this method, honestly. I read over and over online that since the blocks were made for the average Japanese girl, I had little hope. Luckily, the instructions give you ways to calculate everything from your bust measurement all the way down to dart reduction for your waist. Is it busty friendly? I give it a 5 out of 5 stars, and that's because it looks like it fits me really well just to begin with, which means I don't have to do too much just because I have a larger bust, which is exactly what I'm looking for. It even gave you calculations on how to find your dart width and your dart angle measurement, which is really cool. So is this plus size friendly? I give this a 4 out of 5 stars. While it does take your bust measurement into consideration throughout the whole process, it also takes your waist measurement into consideration when you're starting to draft all the darts. Now I know what you're thinking. The Natalie Bray method had a size chart and all of these measurements and all of these proportions all set up for you. So does the Bunka method, and it doesn't even go as high as the Natalie Bray method. Why did you give the Bunka method a higher score? I can tell you why right now. The Bunka method gives you every single calculation you need. So even if you don't fit into that table, all of the calculations are there for you to calculate, and you don't have to worry about whether or not you guessed properly and figured out a pattern on the proportion or anything like that. So that's why it rates a bit higher. And then for personal fit, I give this a 5 out of 5 stars. I mean, I think it fits me pretty well and exactly what a sloper should fit like, which is fairly tight, not too tight, but obviously doesn't really have too much wearing ease. It seems to only need the most minimal changes. For example, that shoulder seam is a little bit too long, like I said earlier, so I'm going to take that in a little bit. But aside from that, there's not too much that I need to do, and I really like that. So to recap, here are my ratings. The Helen Joseph method came in at 10 out of 25 stars. Its obvious downfall was that I couldn't continue drafting. I also needed a full bust adjustment, and it just didn't seem very inclusive to all types of measurement. The Bunka method had a total of 19 out of 25 stars. I think that the Bunka method's biggest downfall was really just how difficult it seemed in the beginning to follow the drafting and to just make all the calculations. But once you got past that little hurdle, it seems good to go. So to place it in all of the last drafting methods, here it is. As you can see, Helen Joseph-Armstrong came in at the very bottom, and the Bunka method came in just after the Aldrich method. I personally would choose the Bunka method over the Aldrich method because, one, I don't like the shoulder dart on the Aldrich method. Now I know you can move the shoulder dart to the bust or any other place, but I just didn't really like it for some reason or another. But also, the Bunka method felt a lot more personal. It utilized your measurements and your measurements only. There was no ratio chart. There was no standard that it followed. It was based off of your body, and I just felt more personal. Again, I hope this type of video helps you choose which type of method or methods that you would like to draft for yourself. Don't forget that the first draft will not be perfect, but hopefully this will help you make a better fit in the beginning. That way you don't have to do as many alterations in the end. As always, if you have any comments, tips and tricks, or even another pattern drafting method that you might like me to try, comment down below. Busty is wondering why you haven't subscribed to my channel if you didn't already. Isn't that right, baby bear? Do you have more to say? Okay. Okay.